Chapter 3: The Fateful Intersection of Two Visionaries. In the sprawling convention center of Silicon Valley, the annual tech conference, Innovate Now, was in full swing. The event was a magnet for the brightest minds in the industry, drawing in developers, entrepreneurs, and visionaries from all corners of the globe. Among the sea of attendees were Clara, with her groundbreaking AI syntactical trust, and Bidzil Bey, the guardian of compliance, who was making waves with his innovative approach to trust administration. Clara's presentation on the main stage was a resounding success. She spoke passionately about the potential of her AI system to revolutionize the way APIs were used, emphasizing the importance of transparency, control, and trust. As she showcased the capabilities of her system, the audience was captivated. Her vision of a transparent and efficient future resonated with many, but it struck a particular chord with one individual, Bidzil Bey. Bidzil, having just concluded his own presentation on the integration of AI into trust administration platforms, was intrigued by the parallels between their projects. He saw in Clara's AI syntactical trust a kindred spirit, a complementary force that could further enhance his own endeavors in trust management. As the presentations concluded and the attendees mingled, Bidzil made his way through the crowd, intent on introducing himself to Clara. Their meeting was serendipitous. As they exchanged ideas and insights, it became clear that their individual projects, when combined, had the potential to reshape the landscape of both trust administration and software development. Clara's expertise in APIs and Bidzil's deep understanding of trust dynamics could create a synergy that neither had anticipated. They spoke for hours, brainstorming potential collaborations and envisioning a future where their combined efforts could lead to unprecedented advancements in their respective fields. By the end of the conference, Clara and Bidzil had forged not only a professional partnership but also a deep mutual respect. They recognized in each other a shared passion for innovation and a commitment to pushing the boundaries of what was possible. It was the beginning of a collaboration that promised to redefine the intersection of technology and trust.
And in this particular lecture, I'm going to cover a number of different things, and a lot of this to some people may seem like way out initially, which it seemed to me, but I tried to gather as much facts as possible outside of the Moors to prove what we're saying. A lot of times people say, well, y'all Moors saying this, but show me something else that's saying what y'all saying, that proves what y'all saying. So I tried to gather as much as possible, and I have a lot of information here to share. I tried to organize as best as possible because a lot of information, and I just tried to put it in the best way so that you could be able to grasp it. I'm going to start off speaking about a man by the name of Horace Greeley. And he was part of a worldwide conspiracy to conceal the information that I'm about to speak on today. And there's a definite reason why this information was concealed. Horace Greeley was the founder and editor of a paper called the New York Tribune, which was located in New York City. This newspaper was a national newspaper, as well as international, and it had a profound effect on the consciousness of European people. At the time when this was put together, sometimes we think that Europeans, that, they've been a world power, going way back to so-called Greeks and Romans time, all that's fictional. All that's fictional. They just got themselves together as recently as 1854 to 1865. This is when they finally got themselves together to govern the planet on a global level, as recent as that date. And this is around the time of the Civil War. And at the end of the Civil War, they was finally able to put certain things together to bring themselves together. At the time, during Horace Greeley's time, they was in a similar condition that we are in now, in the sense that you had many different white organizations at that time. They were all striving for the uplifting of their people, but they had many different ideologies, many different groups of themselves all striving and vying with each other, sometimes bitter conflict with each other in order to achieve that goal, which is the upliftment of their people. The key role that Horace Greeley played was that his paper, his organ, the New York Tribune, was able to gather up all those people and give them a sense of a unified context or paradigm or direction that they was all able to unify themselves behind, regardless to their different ideological differences and so on and so forth. And this is what we're hoping that the Moorish paradigm or the Moorish Renaissance that's taking place now will be able to do. That it will serve as a paradigm that will be able to unify our people in regards to the different ideologies. You know, coming out from New York City, you know, and I sell books in Harlem on 125th Street, as well as in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn. And being in those two places, I've come in contact with every aspect of the so-called black movement or national, or whatever you want to call it. I've come in contact with every aspect of it. Hebrew Israelites, every sect and division of Islam you could think of, black nationalists, all different types of groups, you know. And it seems like this may be able to unify us behind a certain paradigm. A paradigm is a certain perspective or outlook on the world. And this is what we're about to get into. We're about to have what's known as the paradigm shift. We're about to come into a new paradigm, a paradigm that will allow us to rise our people up and take our rightful place in history. Horace Greeley, prior to Horace Greeley's time, the European, or what we call the white man or whatever, he was known as the red man. And they called themselves red men. As a matter of fact, Horace Greeley was a member of a political party known as the Red Men's Whigs Party, which eventually he promoted to be changed to the Republican Party. The present-day Republican Party originally was called the Red Men's Whig Party. Horace Greeley, as well as Abraham Lincoln, were members of the Red Men's Whig Party. He suggested to them that they change their names to the Republican Party, and as opposed to call themselves red men, call themselves white men. And this was to set up this whole dynamic of white being pure and good and white being bad and inferior, this whole white supremacist mentality or paradigm that was being perfected at this time. Now, just to give you an idea of the power and of the influence of Horace Greeley, this was taken from a book called Horace Greeley in the New York Tribune during the Civil War. And it says in the introduction, it says, all contemporaries, friends, and foes alike testify that the Tribune exerted the greatest influence upon public opinion of any journal in the country during the period under discussion, which was the Civil War period. It goes on to say that the paper furnished the basis of a power national in scope and at times enabled the editor to mold public sentiment more effectively than even the president. Horace Greeley in that paper, the New York Tribune, actually had more influence over the mindset of European people on an international scale than even the President of the United States. Karl Marx was just the London correspondent of the New York Tribune. This was an international thing that took place here. All right? It also says that it would have been difficult to convince the great mass of rural subscribers from western New York to Iowa that the old white-coated philosopher, Horace Greeley, did not pen every line in their political Bible. Herein lies the crux of the Tribune power and influence. Horace Greeley was more than the editor of a great newspaper. He had acquired an enviable reputation as an expounder of political views and had actively sponsored the organization of the Republican Party on a national scale. So Horace Greeley had a great deal of influence. And he was like more or less, let's say, the point man that more or less gathered around him all these different people, covering all different various disciplines, everything from medicine to science to history. Just to give you an example, there's an article I have here called Archaeological Cover-Ups. This is an article that was taken from a magazine called Nexus Magazine. And this is a very good magazine. If you have a chance, get a hold of it. I believe Brother Emiola from the Black Mind Builders sells this particular magazine. And this particular article, Archaeological Cover-Ups, was dealing with the Smithsonian Institute, which was founded a little bit prior or during Horace Greeley times around in 1829. And it starts off, it mentions, it says, most of us are familiar with the last scene in the popular Indiana Jones archaeological adventure film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, in which an important historical artifact, the Ark of the Covenant from the temple in Jerusalem, is locked in a crate and put in a giant warehouse, never to be seen again. I'm sure you all remember that part at the end where they shipped it in. They had all these different boxes marked top secret. It goes on to say, the Smithsonian Institute is an independent federal agency. Sounds familiar? IRS, Federal Reserve, so on. An independent federal agency has been actively suppressing some of the most interesting and important archaeological discoveries made in America. Now, what they were covering up was our history in this hemisphere. At this time, this is the time when they concocted this myth that we were all brought over here on slave ships from Africa to be their slaves. This is one of the biggest lies they ever put together. You're going to see the massive proportions of the lie that they have put forward. Yeah, there were some that were brought here from Africa. But by far, the majority of us were already here. We had a civilization that went from Alaska all the way down to Chile, which they refer to as the ancient mound builders, the one who built the civilizations and built the mounds and pyramids all up and down this hemisphere. And you're going to see further what is the significance and the major role that we played as civilization here in this hemisphere. And the Smithsonian Institute was key in covering up these facts. And then they also mention in here about the Vatican and how they have an underground library in the Vatican. The walls 5 feet thick and 24-hour security. What they hiding down there. And he mentions how they have things down there that will conflict with the church's credibility or perhaps cast the official text in doubt. So they keep these things hidden. And it says, and it goes on to say, it says, when Thomas, the guy's name is Thomas, he was the director of the Eastern Mound Division of the Smithsonian Institute's Bureau of Ethnology. It says, when Thomas came to the Bureau of Ethnology, he was a pronounced believer in the existence of a race of mound builders distinct from the American Indians, the people who they're saying American, with the long stringy hair, so on and so forth. He believed that there was a race of mound builders distinct from the American Indians. However, John Wesley Powell, the director of the Bureau of Ethnology, a very sympathetic man toward the American Indians, had lived with some of these ones who they call Indians, and he felt sorry for them. He felt that they say he felt sorry for them and they were treated unfairly and that they should get the credit for this. Now remember now, they were in the process of wiping these people out. So it's easy to give credit to a people that you know you're about to wipe out anyway. It goes on and says the Smithsonian began to promote the idea that Native Americans at that time being exterminated in the Indian Wars were descended from advanced civilizations and were worthy of respect and protection. They also began a program of suppressing any archaeological evidence that led credence to the school of thought known as diffusionism, a school which believes that throughout history there has been widespread dispersion of culture and civilization via contact by ship and major trade routes. Keep that in mind because remember, Moor means navigator. We were a maritime nation all over the planet. And keep that in mind because we're going to get deeper into that. This says the school of thought known as diffusionism believes that throughout history there was a widespread dispersion of culture and civilization via contact by ship and major trade routes. It goes on and says, but the Smithsonian opted for the opposite school, known as isolationism. Isolationism holds that most civilizations are isolated from each other and that there has been very little contact between them, especially those that are separated by bodies of water. And this intellectual war that started in 1880s, right around Horace Greeley time. Now, this school of thought, isolationism, gives credence to their whole philosophy of us being so-called third world peoples and them being so-called first world peoples. They're saying this is the first time the world has been unified as what's known as the global village, or unified in economy and trade and so on and so forth. Wrong. There's been two civilizations prior to that in which it was unified by the Moors. First the ancient Moabites or Moabites, and then the Moors. It goes on to say, when the contents of many ancient mounds and pyramids of the Midwest were examined, it was shown that the history of the Mississippi River valleys was that of an ancient and sophisticated culture that had been in contact with Europe and other areas. Not only that, the contents of many mounds revealed burials of huge men, sometimes 7 or 8 feet tall, in full armor with swords and sometimes huge treasures. All this was being found by the Smithsonian. This gets back into the Bible where they talk about these different giants and Nephilim and so on and so forth. And it goes on and says, for instance, when Spiro Mine in Oklahoma was excavated in the 1930s, a tall man in full armor was discovered along with a pot of thousands of pearls and other artifacts. The largest such treasures so far documented. We have many more treasures here. The elders taught us that the Moors did more building underground than we did above ground here. And you see what we did build above ground, or what's left, what the Dominicans and Franciscan priests did not destroy and vandalize and loot and burn and pillage. And underground, they are aware of the vast underground tunnel networks that we have built underneath this country, where you was able to travel from New York City to California underground without having to come above ground once. And their military has taken over some of these underground facilities, but they could go over so far deep. And they know through different infrared and satellite pictures and so on and so forth, they know that there's other things deeper down that they can't get to. And when the conquistadors came away, they found whole villages and cities empty with people. They didn't know where they went. Oh yeah. Continuing on, it says, he was told by a former employee that the Smithsonian, that an employee was dismissed for defending the view of diffusionism. And it says the Smithsonian at one time had actually taken a barge full of unusual artifacts out into the Atlantic Ocean and dumped it into the ocean. This is what they was doing with some of the things that they found. And it mentions here about stone coffins that was discovered in 1892 in Alabama, which were then sent to the Smithsonian Institute and then lost, according to the newsletter. And then going further down, it says, the head curator says, we have not been able to find the specimens in our collections, though records show that they were received. And it says, the Alaskan mound, they found a mound up in Alaska, and it says the Alaskan mound was in fact a graveyard of gigantic human remains consisting of crania and long leg bones. The crania measured from 22 to 24 inches from base to crown. Since an adult normally measures about 8 inches from back to front, such a large cranium would imply immense size for a normally proportioned human. In fact, the habit of flattening the skull of an infant and forcing it to grow in an elongated shape was a practice used by ancient Peruvians, Mayans, flatheads, Egyptians. You see some of the Egyptian pictures where they have the long head, even in the South. You know, I heard stories where they used to actually shape the baby's head with their hands. You know, all this is directly related to us. Also, it says that they found statues ranging from less than an inch to 6 feet. Now, check this out. Depicting reptiles or dinosaurs, some of them in active association with humans, showing us contemporary with dinosaurs in this hemisphere. And we want to know who was the first people, who's the true Native Americans. There's nobody here standing on in this part of this hemisphere that could trace their roots back here further than us. Contemporary with dinosaurs. It goes on to say they also found portrayals of Bigfoot and aquatic monster-like creatures, weird human-animal mixtures. This gets into another lesson that's part of the course where we get into Yakub and how we kind out different types of experimentation in the Pyramid University of Yucatan, Mexico, where they have found all kinds of remnants and artifacts showing all kinds of crosses. We think genetic engineering and gene splicing, in vitro fertilization, we think these are new things. Our ancestors was mastering these things long time ago in the Pyramid University. This is how we made what we call the white race. By our scientists. Ain't no natural selection or none of that made no white race because they was up in the North Pole. What about the Eskimos? Continuing on, right? It's a lot of information. We're going to try and cover as much of this as possible. Now check this out. It says, historian and linguist Carl Hart, editor of World Explorer, then obtained a hiker's map of the Grand Canyon from a bookstore in Chicago, poring over the map, we were amazed to see that much of the area on the north side of the canyon has Egyptian names. The area around 94 Mile Creek and Trinity Creek had areas or with names like Tower of Set, Tower of Ra, Horus Temple, Osiris Temple, Isis Temple. In the Haunted Canyon area were such names as Cheops Pyramid, the Buddha Cloister, Buddha Temple, Manu Temple, and Shiva Temple. All this was found in the Grand Canyon, and they have closed those sections off because they said it's too dangerous. All this is sitting right there to this day. And this is another article from the same magazine that deals with exploration. This is from a front page from the Phoenix Gazette from the 5th of April, 1909. And the title says, Explorations in Grand Canyon, Mysteries of Immense Rich Cavern Being Brought to Light. And it talks about how, it says, Mr. Kincaid found like a cavern, like a crypt, with human heads, solid rock carved by human hands, and tablets and all kinds of things he found in there. And he had to go nearly a mile underground, about 1,480 feet below the surface. The long main passage has been delved into to find another mammoth chamber from which radiate scores of passageways like spokes on a wheel. Up in New York, where you got these different things, you got all kinds of old names like Day Street, D-E-Y, Moore Street, all in the same area, right by Wall Street. Right in the Wall Street area where they found the ancestral burial grounds, you got a Moore Street and a Day Street, D-E-Y. And the elders told us there were 5 groups of Moors here. The Bays, the Days, the Owls, the Eels, and the Alis. And that gets into the 5 civilized tribes, as well as the 5 pairs of sons of Poseidon who governed Atlantis. And we're going to get into that connection also with Atlantis. There was an Indian legend dealing with the Hopi Indians. The original Hopis were our ancestors as well. And it says that in connection with the story, it is notable that among the Hopi Indians, the tradition is told that their ancestors once lived in the underworld in the Grand Canyon. A dissension arose between the good and the bad, the people of the one heart and the people of the 2 hearts. It sound like the Boulay. They have 2 hearts, or it sound like some of those Uncle Tom Negroes who have 2 hearts. You know what I'm saying? They want to be down with the white man, but they want to be down with us, 2 hearts. And it says that Macheto was their chief, counseled the good ones with the 1 heart to leave the underworld, the underground city, but there was no way out. The chief then caused a tree to grow up and pierce the roof of the underworld, and the people of 1 heart climbed out. They tarried by the Red River, which is in Colorado, and grew grain and corn. They sent out a message to the temple of the sun, asking the blessings of peace, goodwill, and rain for the people of 1 heart. The messenger never returned. But today at the Hopi villages at sundown can be seen the old men of the tribe on the housetops gazing towards the sun, looking for the messenger. When he returns their lands and ancient dwelling places will be restored to them. We are those messengers with the feds. We the ones they're looking for. And all those lands will be returned to us. All right? Now, in connection, and I found a book. Now, I kept telling myself, this whole thing, now this is a whole nother deep area that has to be further researched and looked into. Something bothered me about this whole thing about Greeks and Romans and these Europeans going way back to 500 BC. I said, something don't sound right here. I had a theory. Something told me that somewhere around Horace Greeley's time is that they talk about this Renaissance and all this. Renaissance, the rebirth of classical culture, Greek and Roman culture, whatever. That wasn't no rebirth of no Greek. That was the birth of it for them. They concocted this thing. At that time, students of the Moors, they were students of the Moors. And they were going around, their artists were going around making sculptures and stuff, saying that these were the ancient Greeks. A lot of these sculptures had heads missing that they replaced. Now, I said, there got to be a book. There got to be something that will give me some hints. Remember now, because all this information at Horace Greeley's time was kept out of the institutions of higher learning. But you will find it scattered here and there. You will find a sentence here, a paragraph here, a page here. It's scattered. You got to be almost like a detective, but you got to have the context. You got to have the paradigm first to know what you're even looking at. Once you get this particular context or this particular paradigm, a lot of things that you already know will begin to make a lot more sense in this particular context. And I said, there gotta be a book where I can find that, I can uncover, because something just don't sound right. Then I came across something where Erasmus from the so-called Renaissance period was writing letters to other students under the pen name of Cicero. I said, hold up. And then you hear about, for instance, Francis Bacon was one who they call Shakespeare. And he had a literary group, or a secret society, a secret literary group, who were putting out all kinds of works on more science under the pen name of Shakespeare. So I said, what's going on here? Something don't seem right. You got to get the feel for this thing. Now, one day, this is where the ancestors come in, because once you tune in with the ancestors, they will guide you to certain things. The ancestors will constantly, that whole summer, they were guiding me to all kinds of books, and at that time I was teaching the course, and I have some of the packets here. I have about 10 of them, 5 of them already sold. And I was teaching the course at that time, and I was constantly, each week, they were just sending me, and I would just walk to a shelf, bam, pick up a book, and boom, the jewels would be in there. And I wasn't even using the catalog at a certain point. I was just walking in and just pulling stuff out. And I would get to sections, like I would be teaching on a topic like, for instance, constitutional law, and there would be a whole section on that subject, and I say, man, how am I going to get the best book for the class or whatever, you know? And I would go right to a particular book, and it will be exactly the book that sort of like encompasses all the other ones. And it will be exactly the right one. So this is very important that we tune in with the ancestors, because they will lead us and guide us certain things that we need to know at this time. So one day I just got an urge to go to this bookstore, Barnes & Noble, up in Yonkers. And when I went there, I seen 2 nuns. And it just hit my mind, because somebody had told me, one of the elders said that C.M. Bay had got a lot of this information. C.M. Bay, who gave us a lot of this information, got it from a Catholic priest who had this stuff hid. So I thought about that when I seen them. I walked a little bit further, and there it was, the book I was looking for, a big, gigantic book, and on the top of the book it says fake. And it talks about all the fakes, artifacts that were being faked by these Europeans. And this is one excerpt from it, and it says the 19th century, the great age of faking. And this is right around the time of Horace Greeley. And it says the 19th century saw a fundamental shift in the relationship of Western culture to the past. And it says, a man by the name of Horace Walpole, sounds almost familiar, Horace Greeley, Horace Walpole and his circle had discovered the romance of the past, even in objects surviving from the period of barbarism between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance. Their discovery arriving on the eve of the Industrial Revolution, a period in which spread of affluence was combined with the increasing desire to escape from the present, because they know they didn't have no history at that present time, produced an explosion in collecting. From classical antiquities and old master paintings, the mania spread to encompass the chivalric glamour of the Middle Ages, the sculpture and decorative arts of the Renaissance, 18th century ceramics, 17th century metalwork, and even towards the end of the century. So in other words, at this time, they was dealing with all this that they have spaced out over hundreds of years, the Renaissance. They was dealing with all this at this time, and this is the time when they was concocting this whole thing, this whole false history. And it says the collective mania created a paradise for dishonest dealers. As each new craze took a sudden imbalance between supply and demand, create the perfect opportunity for such people to peddle their fakes before a pool of expertise had been created. It says, craftsmen and some artists were themselves bemused and sometimes embittered by the fact that this old work had suddenly replaced them. So what they did to maintain a living, they started making fakes of so-called old stuff, because the stuff they was making contemporary, it wasn't selling. And they seen it was such a craze for so-called antiquities that they began faking these things. All right? So that just will make you understand sometime when you see, they talk about this Greek and this Roman from 500 BC, all that's fictional. And what they did, Horace Greeley time, is also they shifted time. They added 580 years to our calendar. According to our calendar, this is the year 1414. They added 580 years to throw you off. So things that you, for instance, let me get into this right here. This is another book. And see, there's certain things, being up in New York, I've seen Afrocentricity come, reach its peak, but it has not been able to answer the problems of our people. Brothers and sisters still out there killing each other off. They'll come up to you with a big African in the chest and kill you. They don't care. So it has not been able to meet or solve the problems of our people. And like New York was the center of Afrocentricity. I was out there with the books, I seen the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? But there were certain limiting factors within it. For one, Afrocentricity means, when you say Afrocentric or centered, that means you're just centering on Africa, and you're excluding a lot of other things. There were certain books, certain things that you wouldn't look into. For instance, I got this information from a book by a guy named Barry Feld. He's a Harvard professor, and he was talking about a lot about Leif Erikson and the Vikings and all that stuff like that. So you in Africa, so you see someone on the Vikings, I don't know about that. That ain't got nothing to do with me. That's some white people. Those ones who they're calling Vikings and Danes were Moorish navigators. And in this book, that if you was of what people mindset you wouldn't even look into, he has a map right here, just to start with this map, and he has listed Libyans. This is North America, and this is a Harvard professor. Libyans, Norse, Greek, Cretans, Iberians, Jews, Celts, all that here in North America. And he talks about the Iroquois Confederacy, for instance. He said the Iroquois are believed to have reached North America after most of these settlers have been made, possibly from South America around 1200 AD, passing up the Mississippi to drive an enclave into the Algonquin area. And the Iroquois Confederacy was a very important branch of our people because they had a model of a federal government that the Europeans patterned themselves after. George Washington Benjamin Franklin. There's a book called Indian Givers that talks about that. There's also another book called The Secret Destiny of America by Manly P. Hall. All right, and I'm just going to quote some things that was in this book that relates to us. Just give me a moment to get to the particular pages that I want. He had a chapter in here called Arabs Before Islam. Now, this is very important because this shows you, something struck me as strange also. I said, if the Moors just came about in the 711 AD and invaded Spain and stuff like that, who were the people that the Romans were referred to as Moors? If the Romans and the Greeks were before Islam, Muhammad and Arabs and all that stuff like that, then how were the Greeks and Romans referring to a people contemporary with themselves as Moors? And I said, something's not clicking here, something's not right. Having this paradigm, how they shifted history, you see what I'm saying? You will look, and it seems to me, and more research, like I said, more research has to be done. When they were referring to Carthage, they were referring to the Moors. And Rome was those so-called Franciscans that we were fighting against. You see? And there's a space there of about 800 years. So I said, wait, how does that space 800 years get in there, right? Then I came across something else by another European scholar by the name of Emanuel Velikovsky. I'm sure some of you may have heard of Velikovsky. He was looked down upon by all his peers at that time, and now they're coming around to agree with what he's saying. He wrote a book called Ramses II in His Times, and in it he dropped some major bombs. He proved how Ramses II and Nebuchadnezzar, who according to most Orthodox history is separated by about 800 years, how they were contemporary, how they were at the exact same time, and how when they refer to the Hittite Empire, the Hittites, and Syria and so on and so forth, and since they call it the forgotten or mysterious empire, that wasn't no forgotten mysterious, that was the Chaldean Empire. So there was a space, so somewhere along the line, 800 years was added. Now if you factor that into the equation, that will bring Carthage right up to 711 AD with the Moors. The 800-year difference. See, they were playing, the European was a master. What he was doing during this period of time is that he was grafting a history. When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that he was given 6,000 years to rule the earth, he didn't rule this earth for 6,000 years. He was given dominion or jurisdiction over 6,000 years worth of history. When you look in the books, all his history books start off with historical times as 4,000 BC, which up to now would be 6,000 years. When you look in the King James Version of the Bible, it starts off 4004 BC. So what he did was manipulate and graft and change up 6,000 years worth of history. The grafting process, when you take a nectarine orange, a navel orange that don't have no seeds in it, it's not natural. It cannot perpetuate itself. There's no seed for you to plant. So what they have to do is take a branch, slice it diagonally, take a regular tree, a real orange tree with seeds and everything, cut one of its branches diagonally, and sew it on or tie it onto it, and it will grow and sustain itself off the roots of that original tree. This is the grafting process. This is what these Europeans did. They didn't have no history, just like that orange with no seeds. So they had to graft themselves onto already existing histories to give themselves a semblance of antiquity. They had no history. So they grafted themselves. The original people who inhabited the region that they referred to as Greek was us, dealing with the Mycenaean and Minoan Moors, who were navigators. The ones who inhabited the region that they referred to as Rome were the Etruscans, who were us. You see? So they had to concoct this false history for them to rise to be in the place of power where they're at right now. They ran into a problem. They found some tablets or whatever that had ancient Libyan or Numidian script, and they never could interpret these things. Then one day, they found out that Arabic was the key to it. But that threw them, they said, wait, this is something 200-something BC. The Arabs didn't come till later on to 700. How was Arabic dealing with that? You see? And this was the key to unlocking these particular scripts, and so they could interpret it, which means that, now they try to say that there was Arabs in North Africa or these different places before Islam. No, there wasn't Arabs. These languages were all part. We used many different languages. Sheehan Bey said that Latin was one of our ancient languages. We always associate Latin with European people, or what they call the Indo-European languages. Those are our ancient languages, going into ancient Sanskrit and so on and so forth. We had different languages for different purposes. Latin was a legal, scientific language, and Arabic was a more poetic, dealing with more subtle, conveying more subtle ideas and concepts. The so-called adobe houses that you see in Mexico, the Pueblo Indian, you see the exact same thing in North Africa. The exact same type of houses constructed the exact same way. And it makes sense, because like I said, if you join those two parts together, what they call Libya, all that was all connected with America. It was all one thing. So naturally, you're going to have the same type of houses, the same type of climate, everything. And even the Dogon, the same type of thing, built in the side of the cliff, so on and so forth. The same thing. It's all one knowledge.
And the Dogon mythology and the entire thing is identical to the Hopi Indians. If you look at the pictures of the Hopi Indians and look at the Dogon, it's identical.
Same people, same technology.
We found a Washita Street here at North Highland in Atlanta. A Washita Street, right off of North Highland.
You'll be surprised. This is, see, they would love for all you to go back to Africa and give up the wealth and birthrights to this land here. They had to perpetuate that myth. And because they would know that once you realize who you are, you will claim your birthrights to this land right here that belonged to your ancestors. Imagine how mad your ancestors must be to be buried in these grounds and see you chasing after another land other than the land that you were born on. And you wonder why you kept so much hell and all so many things that happened to you. Because you run in the wrong direction. Not to say anything wrong with our brothers. Those are our brothers on the other side of the Atlantic. The Atlantic is like a big mirror, cosmic mirror. What's on one side is on the other side. Ain't no difference. The elders told us that the original now is right here, Old Man, Mississippi. The Missouri is the blue, and the Ohio is the white now. And where the two come together, they got a city there to this day called Cairo. And the whole region over there, as a matter of fact, to this day, they call Little Egypt. The elders also said that in this hemisphere, you have 7 cities. The 7 churches which are mentioned in the book of Revelations. The 7 churches which are in Asia. And those 7 cities go from St. Louis up to Chicago, over to Detroit, down into Cleveland, Ohio, over to Pittsburgh, over to Philadelphia, and up into Boston. And if you connect the dots of those 7 cities, they give you the constellation of Big Dipper, the Great Bear, which was referred to as Moena, which is also a name that we sometimes call Moorish sisters, Moena. And this is what that particular and it was said by the elders, whoever rules those 7 cities rule the planet. Those are 7 key cities. And until this day, one of the cities still has the same name in the book, City Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is in what? Pennsylvania, which is the Keystone State. And when you look in the book of Revelations under Philadelphia, it says that you have the keys of David. That what you open if no man shutteth, and that what you shut if no man openeth. And in Philadelphia, what do you see there? They call it the city of brotherly love because that's what we had the keys to our federal government, to the European Masons. And you see the Liberty Bell. Because if you take this and turn it inside out, you got the gong, you got the Liberty Bell. And you wonder why it's cracked. When your liberty was taken from you, that's why it's cracked. You see? The Liberty Bell, and they also refer to the feds as the Liberty Cap. When you see that soft cap that they refer to as the Liberty Cap that's red, that's the feds. And then you look at the coat of arms. The elders also told us that what they called here in this hemisphere the Spanish Empire was in reality the Moorish Empire. And then you look at the coat of arms for El Salvador. You see the feds on top of it. You look at the coat of arms for Haiti. The feds is on it. Look at the coat of arms for Cuba. The feds is on it. Don't take my word for it. Go see it for yourself. The feds is sitting right up on there with a halo around it, just like the all seeing eye on the dollar bill. The same thing, because this is the pyramid. The all seeing eye. This has a deep significance. You'll be surprised when you put this up on your head. Watch the responses that you get from Europeans, any people. I don't care where they come from. When we be standing there at 125th Street, all the brothers, we be out there, and all you see is feds out there, Germans, they all come by, they look, they're like, man, the Moors, they waking, they realizing who they are now. They come to, I don't care what country, Pakistan, the rulers in my country, they wear that. Africans come to me, only big chiefs could wear that in my country. This was a sign of nobility of the rulers of this planet. Continuing on, and see, the things we built in some of those 7 cities, the old man Mississippi, coming down, this region right out here is known as ancient Egypt. Headquarters, Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, the Memphite theology. Oh, that's right here. Oh, that's right here. The 5 Great Lakes. 5 lakes that were man-made by our ancestors that contain half of the world's fresh water supply. And that whole region over there is known as the breadbasket of the world. We fed the whole planet from there. And the elders also said that the original Mecca was Chicago, the center of all food, wheat, grain, and livestock distribution for the planet. And until this day, it's still that way. So we got to realize where we standing at right now and who we really are. When those Moors seen that we were falling from power, they took certain Europeans and initiated them and made them mystic Turks, chief protectors of the sacred shrines. They're not the owners. You had to be a master mason to be up in the federal government. And their duty was, when we seen that we were falling, we said, well, and they were coming to power, we said, let's initiate a group of them and put them there to protect our sacred shrine from the Catholics who would have destroyed everything up in here. And look at the Kennedy who was killed. What was he? A Catholic. Can't be no Catholic to be up in our sacred shrine dealing with religious mystery. We deal with science of mathematics from 0 to 9, zodiac and geometry, minus religious superstition. We don't get into that. We deal with universal science. They're waiting for you to come and claim what's rightfully yours. We sitting back, I'm a Negro, I'm a color, I'm a black, I'm African. When you come to them with that, they say, look, go back and study some more, come back when you're ready. Because this was given to me by Moors. The title of this says Moor. If you don't come correct, you're not getting nothing. And the FBI, I got a picture of Hoover. What the fact? Let me just get this picture out here. So you can just see, I'm getting a little bit into the other lecture here, but I just want you to see this. If I can find it. And here you see a picture. Just give me a second. There's so much information, you know. I'm just trying, I just wish people could see. I did about 15,000, 20,000 hours of research over the last 12 years. And I've seen things, I'm just trying to get it to the people so everybody else can see what I've seen. Because I've seen some stuff that you would be surprised. I can't find it right this second, but I will eventually show it to you. But it's a picture of J. Edgar Hoover with the feds on it. And you know, for many decades, for all intents and purposes, he was the federal government. And he said, well, then why was he coming down on the black people? The elders mentioned that there was a Moor up in Cleveland, I think, who was mixing this Moorish teachings with black nationalism. And I heard that the FBI stepped to the brother and said, listen, it was your fathers who put us in place to protect us when y'all fell from power. And we will kill anybody or deal with anybody who advocates overthrow. I don't care if they call them, if they're white, they're mafia, whatever. So they said, you better talk to that brother. See, we got to understand what we're dealing with here and who we really are. They know when they see you with this on your head, believe me, they know that you know who you are. And they respect you properly for that. You'll be surprised at the response you get. And it's not even about that. It's about us uplifting ourselves and returning ourselves to the right place so we can get the planet back on track. Like I said, when the cats away, the mice will play. That's what's been going on. While we've been sleeping, this beast's been ruining our planet.
You know what is very important about it? I know at least everybody in this area here knows about the King Arthur Plan. And if you look at the King Arthur Plan, every organization on there, the
Black Muslims,
everybody but the Moors.
That's right. You want to see no Moors listed on that. You want to see no Moors listed on none of them organizations there. Because if you're a Moor, you know who you are. This is yours anyway. You just got to wake up and claim what's rightfully yours. And what I'm giving you now will give you the historical basis to substantiate your claim. This is ours. And what the Empress has done in Louisiana is this example. That's set the precedence what's going to happen, a lot more of what's going to happen as we begin to claim our land here in this hemisphere. Our brothers all up and down this hemisphere. We got to realize who we are. We're over 100 million strong. Over that, way over that amount in this hemisphere. If we realize who we are and wake up and do what we got to do on this planet, and we claim this, our brothers claim Africa, claim that over there, we can get this planet back on track the way it's supposed to be. But time is short, you know. A lot of things, they have a lot of things. See, he was given power. As long as you as long as you don't realize who you are as a Moor, and you call yourself black, Negro, all this other stuff, he has the right to do whatever he want to do to you. He could do anything to you. Anything. And this is what he's doing now. You see what's happening now. Just to diverge for a minute, you know, just so we can see what's taking place here and how critical we're at a very important junction in time right now. They closed down the military. Janet Reno, who's the Attorney General, said that they was going to use the closed down military bases as work camps. Now what has happened is that the prison system has replaced the factories in the white communities. And guess what? We are the raw materials of this factory. This is how all them white men that lost them jobs or whatever, the factories closed down, now they open up a prison, so now they're correction officers, and they got to make the uniforms and suits and all. Those are jobs. And we the raw materials. We being set up. We like cattle being led to the slaughterhouse. Right up in New York, New Jersey, in that region up there, they had forced everybody to get immunizations for measles. You couldn't attend college. When I walked into campus in the fall semester, they had a list of everybody's name who didn't get shots, saying you cannot come on here if you didn't get your shot. I said, what? Now they forced the people. Now all of a sudden there's a massive outbreak of measles on the college campuses, a state of emergency. Now this isn't a coincidence. You just did vaccinations, and now all of a sudden there's an outbreak? And then all the kids are talking about, I'm going to get my vaccination shot. Cattle being led to the slaughterhouse and don't realize it. You know, in terms of the gang warfare and all the different things that's going on. For instance, Clinton just recently said that they're going to pass a bill. They want to pass a bill giving the police the right to go up into public house without search the house with no warrant, nothing, because of what's happening in Chicago. Think about that for a minute. You're talking about police, and the thing about it, we are calling for the police state. They know they can't afford. We're saying, man, crime is too much in my neighborhood. Oh man, I'll give up the right of privacy for the right to live. You are calling for a police state, and they say, we'll oblige you. We'll give it to you. That's what you want. You know, so we got to wake up. Things is happening. So many things is happening now. They passed so many laws. This, that, this, the state. We got to declare our independence from Union State Society and build ourselves. I'm going to get into that more towards the end. Let me just continue on. And this book just gets into all types of artifacts, hieroglyphics that was found. As a matter of fact, to show you how this is one world of our empire, the recent edition of Nexus magazine has an article in here that deals with, it says, Mystery Rock Carvings, Proof of Atlantis. And it shows you in Australia, they found hieroglyphics in Australia. Straight up hieroglyphics, cartouches and all. We had a vast global network and the technology was advanced. Here's a picture of model airplanes that were found in Central America. Aerodynamically built, look like modern airplanes. We was dealing with space flight, the whole nine. None of these things was new to us. I have a videotape here the facing pyramids on Mars. And what they did, this is a lecture given inside the United Nations. There's a whole complex they found up there with numerous structures. When they measured the angles of those and the measurements of that complex up there, they gave key formulas of physics and geometry. And they matched up with the megalithic structures we built down here, the pyramids, Stonehenge, and so on and so forth, showing this was all one technology we was dealing with. Ain't nothing new under the sun. We was dealing with all these things that we thinking is new now. We always had knowledge of these things. Let me just read you this article here. Oh, and also to show you something else, showing you the discrepancy in regards to chronology. There's a whole section of books from the Bible, whatever that they call Apocrypha, books that was left out from the Bible. One of the books is a book called the Book of Baruch. And you begin to see why they left these books out, because it contradicts a lot of what they're saying. This book, so-called, deals with Nebuchadnezzar and the so-called Babylonian captivity. But you're going to find out that when they talk about Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian captivity of the children of Israel, the children of Yaqub, it was really dealing with the period of time when the Moorish nation had enslaved the Europeans. We enslaved them before they enslaved us. Now, I know, hold up. That's right. We had them enslaved on a global level for 360 years. This is why they was able to enslave us, because according to the divine law of retribution, what goes around, come around. And this is why the Moorish Empire fell. And you said, wait, they declared their independence from Britain. You think they declared their independence in 1776? When they declared their independence from the Moorish nation. Now, when I first heard, I said, oh, that's crazy. What are you talking about, the Moorish nation? It was the white people from England. I found a book called Diplomatic Relations with the Barbary Powers from 1776 up. And in it, it says that in 1776, Britain, France, Germany, Denmark, Italy, all these countries were paying tribute to Morocco. They were paying tribute to the Moors. You don't pay tribute unless you're a conquered nation. They were paying tribute to the Moors. And we were using them as mercenary forces. This thing is deep. Now, dealing with the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, and this is a time when they learned a lot, the children of Israel, this time when they learned a lot of what they learned. Now, I'm distinguishing between the 12 tribes of Israel, which we are, and the children of Israel, or Yaqub, whose name was changed to Israel after he did his experimentation.
Well, I don't know, maybe 300 years of genocide, that not good enough reason for you, champ?
Oh, you part Mohawk now?
Yes, indeed. Kimasabi, one of the lost tribes of Israel.
Yeah, you track.
And they were enslaved by the Moroccan Babylonian Empire, who were Moors. And to show you how they fooled around with time, it says here, as will be shown, now this is the book of Baruch, it says, as will be shown the sequel tragic events of 586 BC, which herald the exile, constitute a thin historic drapery which invests the yet greater tragedy of the Jewish race in AD 70. It is now generally accepted by recent critics that Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar represent the persons of Vespasian and Titus, which is around 70 AD. So here, they're talking about something that happened, they say 586 BC, then with Nebuchadnezzar. Then here they're saying it's really dealing with Vespasian and Titus. And then if you take it further, you find it's really dealing with something else. So you see the games that was being played here with chronology and geography. And see, we can't accept the chronology and geography they have given us and just be content with just saying it was black people. No, let's question the whole geography and chronology they have given us. Here's another article. This was taken from a book called The Science of the Mexican Pyramids. Now, I think Brother Emiola has the one dealing with the Egyptian pyramids. He should try and also get the one with the Mexican pyramids. There was an article in it, and it shows all these Moors whose head was decapitated and put on poles and put on sticks. And check out what it says. It says, designed for the detection and punishment of heretics, the Inquisition was used as a giant pork barrel for the enrichment of crown, church, and inquisitors, while cheerfully eliminating dangerous radicals. Now listen to who these dangerous radicals are. Those who have been taught medicine, geography, rhetoric, chemistry, physics, mathematics, and astronomy by Moorish philosophers. by Moorish mulatto. I'm just gonna wait till you put it in tape in. And this decapitation was taking place in Mexico. This ain't in Spain. This is in Mexico. Dates. It doesn't have a date on this particular page here, but I'm sure it's around 1600, somewhere around that time. Somewhere around that time, time of the conquistadors and so on and so forth. And it says that the ones who did Inquisition was dangerous radicals were considered were the ones who was teaching mathematics, geography, rhetoric, all these things at that time. These are the ones who they were decapitating. It says the Inquisition was also an excuse to rid the planet of such organized mystics as Illuminati, pantheists, Manichaeans, and Albigensians. So Moors, all these are represented all in one breath as one thing. This Inquisition was for all these so-called people. This is one example of the connection between them. And it says, all the accused were presumed guilty before trial. Now, these are so-called Christians. All the guilty were presumed guilty before there was even a trial. Sounds familiar. Sounds like what's happening to us now. A trial which took place in absolute secrecy. Sounds like the backroom police stations. The defendant was afforded no counsel. Accuser and judge were the same person. The names of witnesses against the defendant were withheld from him. Women, children, and slaves could not be used as witnesses by the defendant, but could be used by the prosecution, who could obtain them by torture. And it says minor penalties could be commuted, paid off, bribery, all that. We know the corruption already. And then it says, now check this, it says, the victim's goods was subject to confiscation and were incorporated into the royal and church domains. We talk about reparations. And this is Europeans saying where our wealth went to. It says that the victim's goods, subject to confiscation, we're talking about land, gold, everything, subject to confiscation were incorporated into the royal crown and the church domains. The inquisitors who paid no taxes and gave no account of confiscation effectively took their share. As a deterrent to possible opposition in New Spain, Mexico, 34 Negroes, including 4 women, were hanged and decapitated in Mexico City. So as a deterrent against the Moors, Illuminati, all the stuff like this, as a deterrent, they hanged 30 Negroes and nobody else. So what is that telling you? That was us, the Moors, the Illuminati, the illuminated ones, who was teaching geography and all this. You see, you got to read between the lines, because they'll tell you by so many words. They can't outright tell you, because they're under open obligation not to. They can't tell you who you are outright. They could never tell you that you were Moors and that you had a Moorish empire just prior to their 1776 Declaration of Independence. They can't tell you that. Their system is based on you not knowing that, and they maintain themselves. Here's a picture, and we think over there, they switch geography around. We think over there is England. The elders told us that the original England is over here in Virginia, Jamestown, King James, Jamestown, Virginia, and that what they over there call England now, we used to call Albion or Albion. That hit me. I said, what are you talking about? Then I came across a book, and it says Sir Francis Drake claimed the land of his. They're talking about California. It says that Drake claimed the land in the name of his queen Elizabeth I. He called it Nova Albion. Nova meaning new, and Albion being an old name from England. For England. So it is by their own scholars that the original name of that place was Albion or Albine because of the white cliffs of Dover. Albino, Albine meaning white. Those white cliffs of Dover. So all this stuff is starting to click and make sense, and the stuff that just seems so far-fetched on one hand, upon doing the research, starts to make a lot more sense. Here, I'm just going to show some pictures here, because a lot of the children, a lot of the Europeans, famous Europeans you see in history or whatever, were actually the mulatto mixed breed children of Moorish nobles and rulers and white women who were in their harems. See, this is where the bleaching out took place. And people who you see in early history here in America, like John Hanson, who were really Moors, were passing as if they were white. What happened was that white women were sold on a global level. They were sold on a global level to Moorish harems all over the world. And the mulatto mixed breed children that you've seen came through them so-called this is where you get the so-called Turks, Arabs, Japanese, Indians. These are the mixed children of us on a global scale. Now, people say, what do you mean we had the Europeans enslaved and we were selling white women on a global scale? There's a lesson here. This is one of the lessons from the packet. This is the fourth one of Big Ben Bay. And in it, like what they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Here's a picture taken from J. Rogers' book, and here you see a Moor with a fez on selling a white woman into slavery. A Moor with a fez on. This is one of the reasons why the Moors fell, because we did it to our own sometime also. Here you see a harem scene with white women in a Moorish harem. All right? So, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Now, look at some of these people here. This right here is King Philip II, Philip III, son of King Philip II. And you can just tell by the lips and everything. He looked like one of our Spanish brothers or whatever. And here is a picture of King Philip II. These various rulers up in Europe. See, originally they were all so-called blackamoors, what they call blackamoors, and eventually through the bleaching out process, it became what's known as tawny Moors, or lighter-skinned Moors. That's where you get this whole thing about tawny Moors. Here's Alexander Farnese, Duke of Parma, the great Spanish general. All mulatto Moors. And they were more refined than the other savage Europeans because they grew up in the courts of the Moors. So they learned how to do like us, how to behave, and how to behave amongst us. And here's even a picture of Sir Francis Drake, so-called, bad guy. You can see too. He was a mulatto Moor, if you look carefully. I know brothers, they look just like him. I have a picture here also of King John, the so-called signer of the Magna Carta. And here you see, he looked just like a brother with two brothers standing in the back of him. King John of England, who so-called signed the Magna Carta. This thing is so deep. I mean, so much history has been left out. Here's a picture of Vesalius, one of the great scientists dealing with anatomy and everything. And you can see, I mean, he had an afro. He has an actual afro, so I mean, there's no doubt he got an actual afro in this picture. And he was the founder. All these great people we see in Europe, most of these were the sons of Moorish rulers and European women. And then I'm going to get into the other class you hear about the Bilderberg group and what's known as the black nobility. And I said, wait, Rothschild, why are Europeans, so-called white Europeans call themselves black nobility? Where did that come from? And then you get into J. Rogers' book, Sex and Race, and you look at the coat of arms of the nobility up in Europe, Germany, France. All these are Moors. Let me just, to prove that they were Moors, and I'm using the specific word Moors. I'm not saying black, I'm saying they were Moors. Dealing with nationality, it says Negroes in the coat of arms of noble family. And with Jerry Rogers, you just got to get past the word Negro when you read his books. He got heavy information in his books. You just got to get overlooked that little word Negro. And here's the noble families these are the French, Italian, Spanish, and Polish noble families. And look at the names. Morelensia, Moret, Moretti, Moreau, Moresque, Moors. All Moors, ruling all throughout Europe. These are the ones from Dutch and Belgian families. And look at the names again. Moreau, Morreal, Moor, straight up Moor, M-O-O-R, straight up. Moors ruling Europe. So there's a whole history. There's a whole aspect of our history. I want to read this part now, too, coming from a book. The desk is starting to get messy now, but that's supposed to happen. This is the heavy book here, Ancient and Modern Britain. And if you can't get your hands a hold of this, there's 2 volumes. And through almost every page of these 2 volumes, all he talks about is Moors, how we were ruling up in Britain, Scotland, Ireland, all those places we were ruling up into. Those so-called marauding bands of gypsies, Egypties. Some of them are the deposed Moorish nobility, that when they were deposed from power, they became so-called marauding bands of gypsies. This is why you see a gypsy sometime in Europe, dark-skinned, dirt poor with a title of nobility. Where did you get this title of nobility? They were the former rulers who were deposed from power. Now, in this book, he mentions it here, and because, see, there's a whole part of our history, we don't get into all this. What about all this up here? on all up into here. All this. We was working this up here. All this up in here. That was all us. All our navigators was all up in here. We just look at this. All of this down here. All that. It's all this. In this book he mentions here, you heard about the Druids, so-called builders of Stonehenge. They just told me, I said, wait, England is, all right, Stonehenge is in England, Stonehenge is in England, and England is ruled by white people. England is for white people. There's white people there. So they built it? And were they the ancient Druids themselves? No. Those are Moorish priests. You know, behind science.
And also there's a book out on Druid religion is dealing with Isis and Osiris.
Exactly.
You know,
and it'll make sense because when you look at up in England, they got places in England called Little Egypt. Actually called Egypt. Which the word gypsies come from. Gypsies. And then he says in here, so he says, this is a white person now, David McRitchie is a white person now. So then the Druids and Druidesses, because they were priestesses also, who had colleges in an island near the coast of Brittany, who professed a knowledge of the future, who the men at least were figured as bearded like goats, with a goatee, just like you see the dog on, and who worshiped the gods, were dark-skinned, curly-haired Iberians of the tribes of Silures and Damani. This seems a fair inference. In other words, he's outright telling you who these people are. They were dark-skinned with curly hair. All right? I'm going to read a couple of things here just to give you an idea. This thing is just action-packed. It's just too much. There's just too much in this book. These books. He drops too much about this. Definition of Moor. Any Latin dictionary, any old one at least, will tell you that Moorish is a Moor, a blacker Moor, or a tawny Moor. And Shakespeare uses the word Moor as a synonym for Negro. And then he goes on in here and he mentions how, remember I said Moors as navigators. And you will find the word Moor always associated with water. He says here, therefore, if the word Moor and its variations were primarily the sea, and Latin or phonetically the mare or whatever, means sea or whatever, mare, more, all the same thing, primarily the sea, and gave its name to a nation of sea rovers, or if the case were reversed, and the sea became associated with the name of a great seafaring race.
Greetings, MWR family, and welcome to our Structure My Legacy training, where today you're going to learn how to reduce your tax rate to 5% or less legally without scrounging for write-offs. This is going to be a bit of a unique training. It's going to be a bit interactive, so I want you to grab a notepad and make sure you have access to the internet, because there's some things I'm going to want you to Google for yourselves as we move forward. What I'm sharing with you today is not a new or novel idea. It's not illegal, and the elite have been using this system for over 100 years, since 1913 when the IRS was created. We're going to show you that this is not something you're going to have to litigate, because it has been litigated. We're going to give you a bunch of legal precedents to show you that this is not new, it is not novel, and the courts have spoken on this matter. As we go through this information, you're probably going to ask yourself this question: why haven't I heard this before? That's a common question that everybody asks, including myself, and the fact of the matter is, it's probably because your CPA or your attorney just don't know, and it's not their fault. It's actually by design, and we will discuss that later. All of the tax forms that you'll need after you apply what I share with you today are available directly on the irs.gov website. We advise 100% full disclosure. When you know the law and the tax codes, there's no need to hide anything, so always file your taxes and report your income. Let me introduce you all to the 1041 tax form. When the IRS was created in 1913, they had two tax forms that they created. One was a 1040, which everybody knows and has filed. The other was a 1041, which is a U.S. income tax return for estates and trust. If you have a complicated tax situation, you know a 1040 tax form can be extremely long. This tax form is 2 pages, has been 2 pages since the beginning, and probably will never cease to be 2 pages. But this is the tax form that allows us to do what we do So you guys will all become very familiar with this particular tax form. When we're speaking of taxes, what we're really ultimately talking about is social capital, right? The government taking in money from the people and supposedly using that money for different services that need to be rendered. That is what we call involuntary social capital. What we're going to talk about today is going to be voluntary social capital, where through your own private family foundation, we get to disperse funds to communities and programs and nonprofits and benefit our society the way we see fit versus expecting the government to know how to do that for us. During this training, you're going to learn how to reduce your taxes to 5% or less with full disclosure and filing all of the proper tax paperwork. You'll learn how to protect your assets from lawsuits, divorce, or any of life's unforeseen events that may cost you money. You'll learn how to leave a bulletproof inheritance and a legacy without worrying about probate, lawyers' fees, the inheritance tax, death tax, or any other of what we like to call eroding factors. You're going to learn how to eliminate the potential for an IRS audit. Yes, I said eliminate the potential for an IRS audit by being in the proper jurisdiction of law. So ask yourself if this sounds like you. You're making good money, but you're struggling to keep it, and getting ahead is a challenge. Are you in a place where you're using the majority of your profits to purchase things or acquire things that will allow you to have tax write-offs? Are you concerned about how to leave your estate, business, and legacy to the people that you love without outside interference? Do you dread gathering all of your receipts and documents to bring to your CPA so you can itemize and complete all of the complicated tax forms? Yes, MWR is helping with that process, so it's less complicated, but it's still a process that most are probably still going through at this point in time. Are you in a place where you want to have more control over your hard-earned money instead of the government controlling and dictating to you what you do with your own money? So if those questions resonated with you, then you have to recognize that there is a problem. And the problem is there's two sets of financial information in this country. If you make a certain amount of money, you're privy to one set of information. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get it, but you have a much better shot. Everything else is offered to the public. Kind of like the 1041 tax form. It's been around as long as the IRS has been around. It's been here just as long as the 1040 tax form, but most people have never heard of the 1041 tax form, and even less have filed the 1041 tax form. Once you understand the difference between these two sets of financial information, you'll keep more of your profits that you've worked so hard for. You'll reach your financial goals much, much faster. You'll then be in a position to create generational wealth for your children and grandchildren. You'll be able to have peace of mind that everything that you spent your life building isn't wiped out over one unfortunate incident. You won't lose sleep anymore worrying about tax season or tax audits, and wouldn't that be refreshing? So before we go any further, let me introduce myself. My name is Roger Grant, and I'm the head of the MWR Trust Division. So I've spent the majority of my life in the financial services, spent a decade straight in the mortgage business until the mortgage meltdown, off and on about 10 years in the insurance business, and have become accustomed to making multiple six figures a year. Now, I mentioned to you guys that there are two sets of financial information in this country. I want to share with you how not having the right financial information affected me personally and why I'm so passionate about what it is that I do. So when I was 28 years old, I started off in the mortgage business. In my first year, I made about $60,000. And I thought that was pretty good because I'd never made that amount of money in my life. So I'm thinking, okay, let's see what we can do with this. The next year, I tripled that amount of money, and the government proceeded to beat me over the head for $50,000. Now, I'm sitting in my CPA's office when he's delivering me this message, and he's telling me, Roger, in your business, you have minimal expenses, you don't own a home, you don't have any children, you don't have enough write-offs and deductions, right? And he said they're going to keep cracking you over the head each year until you figure out a way to have some write-offs and deductions. Now, at this point in time, my child, my first child, my only child actually, was in the womb, and she was born the next day because this meeting sent her mother into labor, and she was born the next morning. So what my CPA told me caused me to go out and to buy a $650,000 5-bedroom home. Now, mind you, I didn't have any children, so I didn't necessarily need a $650,000 5-bedroom home. What I did need was that $3,500 a month mortgage payment as a write-off, as a deduction. Shortly after moving into my home, my CPA also put me into a large insurance policy. It was $1,200 a month. And the reason he did that is because corporate income, I had a C Corp at the time, corporate income, the first $50,000 of corporate income is only taxed at 15%. So this life insurance policy, it was a variable universal life insurance policy, allowed me to put away $33,000 a year, slightly taxed money, only taxed at 15%, on top of the $30,000 I could put at that time into my SEP IRA. So it gave me another place to put away money that was minimally taxed, putting it out of the reach of the IRS, right? Now, there was another loophole in the law at the time that I took advantage of as well. Actually, I believe that loophole in the law still exists today. So here's what happened. About a year after all of this happened, I had a custody battle for my daughter. And the first year of this custody battle cost me about $128,000. So I couldn't afford to pay my quarterly payments to the IRS, and I knew at the end of the year they were going to crush me. So there's this loophole in the law that allowed you, business owners, if you buy a 6,000 pound piece of equipment, which was intended for farmers to incentivize them to buy tractors and whatnot, but any business owner who buys a 6,000 pound piece of equipment could write the whole thing off that year. So what I did was I went out and loaded up a $72,000 Cadillac Escalade. Now, folks, I didn't need a Cadillac Escalade. I already had a Cadillac Escalade and didn't need another one. What I needed was somewhere else to put money so the IRS wouldn't crush me for not paying my quarterly taxes. So what we had here was the house, the life insurance, and a vehicle, none of which I necessarily needed at the size or the amount that I got them, but this is the advice that I was given to prevent the IRS from taking money from me. So to make a long story short, I was spending $72,000 a year to keep the IRS from taking $50,000 a year from me. So I did that for the next 8 years. Got the IRS situation straightened out, got full custody of my daughter, was paying the $72,000 to minimize my taxes, and then the mortgage meltdown came. And because I was dealing with all of these financial situations, when the mortgage meltdown came, I really had nothing left over to survive it. And so I was a casualty of the mortgage meltdown. Why? Because I did not know that there was a better way. So given that there are two sets of financial information in this country, then that means there are two paths financially in this country, the public path and the private path. Most of you are probably familiar with this quote from Nelson Rockefeller, which is John D. Rockefeller's grandson and the former Vice President of the United States of America. He said the key to success is to own nothing but control everything. Now, I'm guessing that most of you don't know exactly what that means or how to pull that off. But the only way that you can have full control over assets and zero liabilities of ownership is to be the trustee in a true trust contract. And the reason Rockefeller said what he said is because there are liabilities to ownership. Anything that you own can be taxed to you and taken from you. So let's take a quick look at the public path versus the private path and how Rockefeller's quote applies to these two different paths. We're going to take a look at a business that is fairly profitable, grossing $500,000 in income, $300,000 in expenses, and $200,000 of taxable liability. On the public path, most businesses are set up as LLCs or S corps. So on an LLC, the profits are passed through to the members, and on an S corp, the profits are passed through to the owners. So this $200,000 of tax liability is going to be passed through to the owner. So let's say this is a single member LLC. That means the owner has $200,000 that he's going to take in on a K1 and pay personal income tax. He's going to have the tax liability of that $200,000. And with write-offs and whatnot, he'll probably pay somewhere in the range of $35,000 to $50,000 in taxes conservatively. On the private path, here's how we would handle that situation. We would change that single member LLC into a multi-member LLC. We would have the owner of the company add a business trust as a partner. And now, instead of that $200,000 going on a K1 to the owner of the company, now the $200,000 would go on a K1 to the business trust. Now the business trust has the ability to pay the taxes on that $200,000, or it can disperse it out to a beneficiary. We don't want to pay taxes on the $200,000, so we're going to do just that. The business trust will legally disperse the $200,000 to its beneficiary, which is the family trust. Now your business just zeroed out. You had $200,000 in profit that was legally dispersed on a K1 from the LLC to the business trust, and then it was dispersed from the business trust to the family trust on a 1041 K1. So now your family trust has taken in this $200,000 as income from the business trust. The family trust can take all of its legal and lawful deductions as well. So for round numbers sake, we're going to say that the family trust has $100,000 in deductions throughout the course of the year, which still leaves $100,000 in taxable liability. The family trust can then make a 100% tax deductible charitable gift to your own private family foundation of $100,000. So that means the family trust had $200,000 in income, $100,000 in expenses. That last $100,000 was a 100% tax deductible charitable gift, which leaves zero, which means now the family trust has just zeroed out and there's nothing left to tax. Now, the private family foundation has one major obligation, and that is it must disperse 5% of what it brings in each year to a charitable organization. That could be the Boys and Girls Club, the March of Dimes, the American Heart Association, a university, a hospital. It doesn't matter where you're sending it. It's not going to the IRS. In this scenario, 5% would be $5,000. The other $95,000 is tucked away in a tax-exempt entity that can invest in anything that is legal and lawful and grow money tax-free legally. We just took $500,000 gross income, $200,000 of which was taxable, and you legally let go of $5,000. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to transition into looking at how we can do what we do and what the law has to say. Okay, guys, this is where we get into the interactive part of this presentation. I'm going to have you looking some things up because as we get into this public versus private information, I want you to understand there's nothing really private. Everything we're going to talk about today is public record. It's just that one set of information is readily available, the other set is kept secret. It's just not talked about, and it's definitely not taught. So let's get into this information, and we're going to examine it, and then it's going to be up to you to determine what set of information makes more sense. So when looking to start a business, people will often look around to see what's the best type of business structure for them to have, right? So this is the public information, and most people will generally just go to Google and type in business structures or business organizations, and this is one I do want you to Google. I live in Texas, so this is just a website here in Texas, but I want you to Google selecting a business organization. It doesn't matter what state you're in, you're going to get the same options. A sole proprietorship, a general partnership, a corporation, S Corp, C Corps, and then at the bottom down there, LLCs. And that's the general gist of the public information as to what entities you can operate from. Now, I just mentioned a business trust, but that is not on this list. As we go through this, I want you to keep that in mind. Wherever you live, what state you're in, if you Google this information, a business trust is not going to pop up in your Google search. But please do look in the state where you're at. The second place that people will generally go to look up what kind of business structures are okay or what they should or shouldn't have is the IRS website. So I want to take you there to this page on the IRS website, and I do want you to either pause this video right now and take this note: abusive trust, tax evasion schemes, special types of trust, or simply just pause this video right now and go to that page and read along with me. It's 2 pages worth of things, entities that the IRS deems as being abusive, right? So I'm going to point out 3 of these, and the first one on the list is a common law trust. So let's read what they say. Contrary to the claims of promoters, common law trusts no longer exist since all states now have statutes relating to the creation and operation of trust. So let's go back and unpack that. Contrary to the claims of promoters, common law trusts no longer exist. The word no longer suggests that once upon a time, common law trusts did exist. And then it goes on to say, since all states now have statutes relating to the creation and operation of trust. So this trust that used to exist does not exist anymore because of the states and state law or state statutes relating to the creation and operation of trust. Understand that, because we're going to examine all of this in the light of legal precedents. Common law trusts don't exist anymore because of state law is what they're suggesting there. Okay, here are the other 2 entities that I wanted to examine on the IRS.gov website. Abusive trust, tax evasion schemes, special types of trust. A business trust, which we just discussed, and a pure trust. So let's read these 2 terms. Business trust. The term business trust is not used in the Internal Revenue Code. The regulations require that trust operating a trade or a business be treated as a corporation, a partnership, or a sole proprietorship if the grantor, beneficiary, or fiduciary materially participates in the operations or daily management of the business. If the grantor maintains control of the trust, then grantor trust rules will apply. Otherwise, the trust will be treated as a simple or complex trust depending on the trust instrument. Now, let's unpack that one. Business trust. The first sentence. The term business trust is not used in the Internal Revenue Code. How does that make it abusive? If I say the Joneses don't exist in the Grant household, that is my home, that is a fact. They don't exist here, but that don't mean the Joneses are abusive. Let's continue. The regulations require that a trust operating a trade or a business be treated as a corporation. So the term business trust doesn't exist, but then they turn around and say that a trust can operate a trade or a business, right? Then they go on to say that it will be treated as a corporation, a partnership, or a sole proprietorship. Keep that in mind. They are saying that if a trust runs a business, it's going to be treated like all of those public entities we looked up on Google. Okay? Then it goes on to say if the grantor or beneficiary materially participates in the operations or daily management of the business, that's irrelevant. Here's something that we're going to talk about. If the grantor maintains control of the trust, that's a grantor trust, then the grantor trust rules will apply. We'll talk about that later. Otherwise, the trust would be treated as a simple or complex trust, depending on the trust instrument, which is your trust contract. All right. Now, let's take a look at pure trust. It says the term pure trust is not used in the Internal Revenue Code. Whenever the name of the arrangement, however, the taxation of the entity must comply with the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code. The requirements are based on the economic reality of the arrangement, not its nomenclature. If the pure trust meets the definition of a trust, then it would be taxed under simple, complex, or grantor trust rules, once again, depending on the trust instrument. So let's unpack that one. The term pure trust is not in the Internal Revenue Code. Just because it's not used in their code does not make it abusive. We saw that with business trust. Says whatever the name of the arrangement, however the taxation of the entity must comply with requirements of the Internal Revenue Code. It says whatever the name of the arrangement, right? It must comply with the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code. The requirements are based on the economic reality of the arrangement, not its nomenclature. So what all that means is you can call a trust anything you want to. There's over 80 different types of trusts. So you can call it whatever you want to. There's only 3 ways a trust is going to be taxed, period. And the document, the economic reality of the arrangement is the trust document itself, not the name of the trust, but how it's structured. The last sentence says, if the pure trust meets the definition of a trust, then it would be taxed under simple, complex, or grantor trust rules, depending on the trust instrument. Now, here's what I want to point out before we examine simple, complex, or grantor trust rules. You see these 3 definitions, common law trust, business trust, pure trust, are listed on the abusive trust tax evasion scheme special types of trust page on the IRS website. Have you seen a reference to anything that says why they're abusive? Any IRS code, and this is why I want you to go there, so I want you to go back and examine these things for yourself. Do you see a code or a law that says why these things are abusive? It's not there. These are words on a web page with no justification as to the validity of the words on the web page, which is why we're going to examine that other set of information, and we're going to do that here right now. But first, we're going to talk about simple, complex, or grantor trust rules depending on the trust instrument. Okay, folks, so there's only 3 ways a trust can be taxed. When they talk about grantor trust, simple trust, or complex trust rules, there's only 3 ways a trust can be taxed. It does not matter what you call the trust, it's the economic reality of the trust, which is the trust instrument. So here are the 3 ways. Grantor trust. All taxes are the responsibility of the creator. We're going to talk in pretty good detail about grantor trust, so I'm going to leave that alone for now. Simple trust. All taxable income has to be dispersed out to the beneficiary, and the beneficiary is responsible for the tax bill. This means that this particular trust cannot pay taxes on its own. It has to push all the money out. Okay? The last is a complex trust. And this is where either the trust itself can pay taxes on the income, or taxable income can be dispersed to the beneficiary. This is the trust that we're going to talk about today. And at the bottom there, it says only a complex trust can give 100% of its income to charity. That is going to be critical as we move forward and we get into talking about this other set of information. Now, guys, in the beginning, I told you that this is not new or novel and it's not going to need to be litigated because it's already been litigated, right? So we're going to take a deep dive into some legal precedents, but I want to start off with this particular article from the Denver Post that says IRS chief apologizes to taxpayers. This is in 1997. I'm sharing this with you so that you can just let your hair down after this and take in the information because this is very interesting. Okay, so that article is from a court case out of the 10th Circuit Court in Colorado. And during the course of this situation, this legal situation, there were some things that were brought out. One of the things that were brought out was the handbook for special agents for the IRS. And this section reads as such: avoidance of taxes is not a criminal offense. Any attempt to reduce, avoid, minimize, or alleviate taxes by legitimate means is permissible. So let's unpack that. Avoidance of taxes is not a criminal offense. Any attempt to reduce, avoid, minimize, alleviate taxes by legitimate means is permissible. So avoidance is not illegal. Evasion is illegal. Not filing taxes and evading taxes is illegal. Avoidance is not a criminal offense in their handbook. But it goes on to say any attempt to reduce, so reducing, avoiding, minimizing, or what does it say? Or alleviate. Any attempt to alleviate taxes by legitimate means is permissible. So what that is telling me is there's legitimate means to do all of the above. To reduce, to avoid, to minimize, or potentially even alleviate taxes by legitimate means. There's a legitimate way that can be done. Okay, here's something else that was in that article that came out during this situation in 1997. In that court case, the judge brought up a previously decided court case called Edwards versus the Commissioner from the 10th Circuit in 1969. And here's what the judge said. A pure trust is not illegal if formed for the express purpose of avoiding taxes. I'm going to read that again. A pure trust is not illegal if formed for the express purpose of avoiding taxes. Now let's pause for a second. The IRS said the term pure trust is not used in the Internal Revenue Code, but it's being used in a court case. It's being referenced back to 1969 in a court case because this has been litigated. And it says it is not illegal if formed for the express purpose. The whole reason that this trust exists is for avoiding taxes. But on the IRS webpage, they said that this is abusive, that the pure trust is an abusive trust. Special type of trust, tax evasion scheme. Tax evasion scheme. This says avoiding. Their own handbook says to avoid taxes is not illegal, and you can do so by legitimate means. So I shared this with you so again, you can let your hair down a little bit. And let's get into the other side of this information, which I reference as private, but none of this is private. All of it is public record. And you'll be able to look it up and do due diligence on your own if you like. And some of it's going to be interactive on this training that we're having. So as we move into this other set of information that we call private, that's not necessarily private, if there's nothing else you take away from this, I need y'all to understand the two most powerful tools in business. And that is a contract and the proper jurisdiction of law. When you marry those two, you create an entity that is bulletproof. So let's take a look at the definition of a trust. A trust is a three-party contract in which one can create a binding, inviolate entity. The creator is able to specify the terms, provisions, and who the other parties are. So let's examine this. A three-party contract. The three parties are the creator, the trustee, and the beneficiary. If you have these three separate, distinct parties, then you create a true trust contract which becomes a binding, inviolate entity. You cannot penetrate it, and it is viewed as a separate legal entity. By IRS definition, it is a separate legal taxable person, right? That is the value of a contract. It separates things from you. Now, if you have what most attorneys put together today is a grantor trust or a living trust, here's how that looks. The creator is also the trustee, and then they typically will pick a loved one as a beneficiary. Well, that violates the definition of a trust contract. You have two parties, but three positions, because one person is fulfilling two roles as the creator and the trustee. Here's what that looks like in a practical sense. If you go out, you have a properly structured trust contract, and you have all your assets in the trust, and you go out and you have an accident that is your fault, and somebody gets hurt, or God forbid somebody perishes, and there's a lawsuit that's brought. When you go to the courthouse, the judge is going to say, well, Mr. Jones doesn't own anything. I'm not sure what you want me to do here. They're going to say, well, we understand he has a trust. We want the assets in the trust. The judge is going to look at that trust and say, this is a separate legal entity. This is a trust contract that creates a separate legal entity. Mr. Jones doesn't own that stuff, so I can't give you anything from the trust. That's how that's going to play out. Going back to a grantor trust or this living trust, here's what it would look like, same scenario. Going to court, they want to sue, he don't own anything, it's all in the trust. The judge is going to look at the trust and say, okay, this is a trust agreement, not a trust contract. Which means that this is not a separate legal entity, this is an alter ego, and you still own all of that stuff. And I want to tie that back into what it said in business trust on the IRS website. Towards the end, it says, if the grantor maintains control of the trust, then grantor trust rules will apply. And that's what we're talking about. Control. Rockefeller said you want to control things without owning things. If the creator is also the trustee, everything still lies on the creator. You still own it. All of the tax liability, everything lands on you. A grantor trust is good for probate. It will definitely get you around probate, but there's no asset protection capabilities. So getting the trust contract right is extremely critical. So what does the Constitution say about a contract? In Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, it states in part that no state shall pass any law impairing the obligations of contracts. What that means is none of the people we vote into office in any state in this country, as a collective, they cannot pass a law that can hinder a contract. Whatever's in that contract cannot be affected by laws passed by legislative bodies. So what do the courts have to say about contracts? Courts, however, must enforce contracts as made, not make new ones for the parties, no matter how unreasonable the terms may appear. They must enforce the contracts as they are written, and they can't make new ones for either party, no matter how unreasonable the terms may appear. And we've all seen this. If you watch any of the judge shows, Judge Judy, Judge Joe Brown, whoever, right? When the parties come in, the judge always asks one side to tell their side of the story, then the other side of the story, they'll listen to the other side of the story, and the first thing out of the judge's mouth is, do you have a contract? And this is why. Courts must enforce contracts as made, not make new ones for the parties, no matter how unreasonable the terms may appear. So if the Constitution says that the people we put into office to make laws cannot pass a law that can impair the contract, and the courts say that courts must enforce contracts, then for all intents and purposes, this trust contract is, just in some degree, creating law. So as you can see, based on the Constitution and legal precedents, a contract all by itself should be pretty much bulletproof. But the problem here we have in America is we have judges all over the country who want to legislate from the bench, who don't necessarily follow the Constitution or even legal precedent. But when you have a state judge, that judge is the authority for the state, and you're not always going to get an appeal. So placing this contract in the proper jurisdiction is what makes it bulletproof. And most people don't understand that there are 3 different jurisdictions of law that we can operate in America. The first is admiralty law. That's military law. Nobody wants to operate there because you really don't have any rights. The second is statutory law. That's state law. And most of us have been taught and believe that we have to operate by the laws of the state that we live in, and that's not necessarily true when it comes to business. The third is the English common law. When I say common law, I'm not talking about common law like common law marriages. I'm talking English common law. The Constitution itself was written under English common law, and the common law existed before there were any states. The true law of the land of America is the English common law, except for Louisiana, which was originally owned by the French. And to this day, the true law of the land in Louisiana is Napoleonic law. And for clients in the Louisiana area, they need to have an address outside of Louisiana for that very reason. But the common law is what the country is founded on. It's what the federal government is based on. And it is not changing across the country. It is universal. So we're going to take a look at some court cases to get an understanding of the contract and the proper jurisdiction of law and what the courts have had to say about this. A trust organization consisting of a U.S. constitutional right of contract cannot be abridged. The agreement, when executed, becomes a federal organization and not under any of the laws passed by any of the several legislators, Crocker versus McClay. Let's break this down. A trust organization consisting of a U.S. constitutional right of contract. We said the U.S. Constitution was written under English common law. So a trust organization written under English common law right of contract cannot be abridged. Cannot be abridged means you can't penetrate it. It's kind of like the definition of a trust as a binding inviolate entity. Cannot be abridged. That language says you can't penetrate this thing. It goes on to say the agreement, when executed, becomes a federal organization and not under any of the laws passed by any of the several legislatures. What that means is we operate above state law. We are not registered on the state level. And if there were any type of legal issues, because you can be sued in a trust as well, if there was any type of legal issues, that's got to be heard in a federal courtroom because this is not a statutory entity. It's not an LLC. It's not an S Corp, C Corp, general partnership. It's none of that. We don't get permission to exist from them. So this is a federal organization which has to be dealt with at the federal level. Now, the last case didn't specifically say common law trust. It says a trust operating on the U.S. constitutional right of contract, right? So let's examine a few more cases to make this really clear. Elliott versus Freeman, Crocker versus Malloy says a business trust is a common law entity formed by contract. I'm going to stop right there. Business trust was on the list of abusive things on the IRS website. It says that term does not exist in the IRS, in the Internal Revenue Code, right? Then common law trust, that was actually the first thing on the website of abusive trust tax evasion schemes, was a common law trust. and they said that entity no longer exists, right? I'm going to reread some of what Business Trust said. It said, the term business trust is not used in the Internal Revenue Code. Now then it goes on to say, the regulations require that trusts operating a trade or a business be treated as a corporation, a partnership, or a sole proprietorship. So let's finish reading the rest of this case. A business trust is a common law entity formed by contract and thus is not subject to the same types of regulations as a corporation. That is diametrically opposed to what the IRS put on that website. But like I asked you before, was there any legal reference or a reference to an Internal Revenue Code to suggest that it is abusive? Because here's the court saying it cannot be treated the way that they say it will be treated. Ashworth versus Hagen's Estate says one of the main objectives of a trust contract is to obtain most of the advantages of corporations, but with freedom from the burdens, restrictions, and regulations generally imposed upon them. Didn't the IRS tell us that it'll be treated just like a corporation, a sole proprietorship, or a partnership? Okay, one more case real quick, and there are several references for this case underneath, but it says a business trust may be organized to engage in any business in which individuals or corporations may lawfully engage. Now, the question is, when we Google how to structure a business, why doesn't this term business trust come up? When we go to the IRS webpage, remember this is that public information. Why do they tell us that this term doesn't exist in their code? It's all over different legal precedents, right? This is why I say it's private. Not that it's private, it's just not talked about, so we don't know what questions to ask. Now, people often ask me, Roger, how old are these court cases? Maybe these cases are a little outdated and what's on the IRS webpage is a little more up to date. So we're going to take a look at this. We're going to take a little journey, about a 100-year journey, and examine that. This section of our training is called the Miseducation of America. We're going to talk about this nation's first private family foundations that ever existed. And we're also going to discuss why your CPA attorney probably doesn't know this information, because they don't know what they don't know. But it's not anybody's fault. It's by design. Because if our financial professionals don't have this information, then it's going to be extremely difficult for us to get it. The document on your screen is titled the General Education Board and Friends. And it is titled that simply because it's an investigation into the United States Board of Education, which John D. Rockefeller started himself. And Congress allowed him to do that. And then Congress had to come back 10 years later and do an investigation into to Rockefeller and Carnegie and these other corporate families and what they actually allowed them to do in establishing the Board of Education. So here's the little backdrop. John Rockefeller was a brilliant man, and he understood that if he could control the institutions that put out information, and if he could control the curriculum of those institutions, then the outcomes will be absolutely predictable. And he can control a whole country through the education system, which is why he created the Board of Education. In terms of institutions, amongst the black communities, our HBCUs are beloved, right? And we think that is generally, black-owned colleges and universities are something that we have put together. Just for an example, Rockefeller's pastor's last name was Morehouse, and his wife's name is Spellman. Things you can look up. So things that we think are us was literally Rockefeller instituting institutions that would create predictable outcomes in our communities. As far as curriculum goes, The reason we learned the Dewey Decimal System in America is simply because John Dewey and John Rockefeller were friends, and Rockefeller wanted the Dewey Decimal System taught. He is still controlling that curriculum from the grave today. So we're going to read a little bit. On the screen, you have 3 highlighted sections. I'm going to go to the second highlighted section on the right, and we're going to start at the first paragraph to give you an idea of the relationship between Rockefeller and Dewey. It says, in 1919, using Rockefeller money, John Dewey, by now a professor at Columbia Teachers College, an institution heavily endowed by Rockefeller, founded the Progressive Education Association. Through its existence, it spread the philosophy which undergirds welfare capitalism, that the bulk of the population is biologically childlike, requiring lifelong care. Let's go through that again. In 1919, using Rockefeller money, John Dewey, who was a professor at Columbia Teachers College, an institution heavily endowed by Rockefeller, founded the PEA, the Progressive Education Association. It had one purpose. Through its existence, it spread a philosophy. This philosophy undergirds welfare capitalism, that the bulk of the population is biologically childlike, requiring lifelong care. That's you and me. It goes on to say in the next paragraph, from the start, Dewey was joined by other Columbia professors who made no secret that the objective of the PEA project was to use the educational system as a tool to accomplish political goals. Yes, they were using the Board of Education to accomplish political goals. Now, we're going to go back to the first highlighted portion on the left-hand side of the screen and read a little bit of what this looks like. It says, the rise of foundations to key positions in educational policy formation amounted to what Clarence Carrier called the development of a fourth branch of government, one that effectively represented the interest of American corporate wealth. The corporate foundation is mainly a 20th century phenomenon, growing from 21 specimens of the breed in 1900 to approximately 50,000 in 1990. So I'm going to pause right there. What they're telling you is these entities that they operate from, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, there was only 21 of them in 1900. In 1990, there were 50,000. There's like less than 150,000 in the country now, I do believe. Let's continue. It says, from the beginning, foundations aimed squarely at educational policy formation. Rockefeller's General Education Board obtained an incorporating act from Congress in 1903 and immediately began to organize schooling in the South, which is where most of our HBCUs are. Joining the older Slater cotton woolen manufacturing interest and Peabody banking interest in a coalition in which Rockefeller picked up many of the bills. From the start, the GEB had a mission. A letter from John D. Rockefeller Sr. specified that his gifts were to be used to promote a comprehensive system. You might well ask what interest the system was designed to promote, but you would be asking the wrong question. Frederick Gates, the Baptist minister hired to disperse Rockefeller largesse, gave a terse explanation when he said the key word is system. American life was too unsystematic to suit corporate genius. Rockefeller's foundation was about systematizing us biologically childlike people, right? So it goes on to say, in 1913, the 62nd Congress created a commission to investigate the role of these new foundations of Carnegie, Rockefeller, and of other corporate families. After a year of testimony, it concluded, the domination of men in whose hands the final control a large part of American industry rests is not limited to their employees, but is being rapidly extended to control the education and social services of the nation. Let's unpack that paragraph real quick. The domination of men in whose hands the final control of a large part of American industry rests is not limited to their employees. We know that the game of monopoly was created because these guys were truly monopolizing everything. So Congress knew that. But they said it's not just limited to that. They said, but it is being rapidly extended to control the education and social services of the nation. Y'all understand this is the federal government? This is Congress saying they're rapidly taking over our job. That's Congress' job. Social services and education. That's the government's job. Okay? It goes on to say foundation grants directly enhance the interests of the corporation sponsoring them, it found. The conclusion of this congressional commission, the giant foundation exercises enormous power through direct use of its funds, free of any statutory entanglements, so they can be directed precisely to the levers of a situation. This power, however, is substantially increased by building collateral alliances which insulate it from criticism and scrutiny. I'm going to go back to one part. It says free of any statutory entanglements. The giant foundation exercises enormous power through direct use of its funds, free of any statutory entanglements. If they're not caught up in statutory entanglements and they're not operating under statutory law, then we have to ask ourselves, what laws are they operating under? We know they're not operating under admiralty law, because that is a place you don't want to be. You don't have any freedoms under military law. So statutory law would include Congress. They just, states create state statutes. Congress creates federal statutes. They're saying they're operating free of any statutory entanglements. That would suggest that they have to be operating under that third jurisdiction of law, the common law. Okay, so I told you guys that sometimes people ask, how old are the court cases that I shared with you, and how relevant are they today in comparison to what is currently on the IRS webpage? And I told you we're going to take a little bit of a 100-year journey, right? So the document we just looked at, the General Education Board and Friends, was based around 1903, 1913, that time frame, right? What we're looking at on the screen now is an article, and the date of this article is Monday, June 13th, 2011. That's that 100-year time frame I was telling you about. So we bring this forward to 100 years, and this is just a little over a decade ago. And this is a court case, says Supreme Court rules no fiduciary exception in trust between U.S. and Native Americans. So I'm going to give you the backdrop, and then we're going to read the highlighted parts. So the Apache Indians in this country had some assets that were being held in trust by the federal government. The federal government was the trustee. The Apache Indians, as the beneficiary, felt as though the government was misappropriating their funds. They said, we need you to open up the books and show us what you're doing with the corpus of the trust. And this is how the court responded to the Apache Indians. In the first highlighted portion, it says, the opinion of the court by Justice Samuel Alito reasoned that the government acting as a trustee is unlike a trustee in a private trust created at common law, because the government is acting within statutory authority granted to it by Congress. So let's back up. Let's unpack that real quick. The opinion of the court by Justice Samuel Alito, who is still sitting on the bench today, reasoned that the government acting as a trustee is unlike a trustee in a private trust created at common law. I thought common law trust no longer existed. That's what was on the IRS page. It's still there today. This case is just a decade old. So this is no different than those other court cases. It just has a more current date on it, but this is a Supreme Court justice referencing a private trust created at common law. And why is it, where's the difference? It says, because the government is acting within a statutory authority granted to it by Congress. Is that or is that not a distinction between two different trusts and two different jurisdictions of law? It absolutely is a distinction made by a sitting justice sitting on the bench right now, just about 10 years ago. Now, that's not the kicker. If we scroll down to the bottom, the third line from the bottom down there says, Justice Sonia Sotomayor was the lone dissent arguing that the government is fulfilling the traditional fiduciary role as a trustee for the benefit of the tribe. Further, she argued that the exception should exist since Rule 501 of the Federal Rules of Evidence text says that the government's privilege is to be informed by the common law. It is the federal government's privilege to be informed by the common law. Why? Because our Constitution was written under English common law. It informs everything the federal government does. So we have two different justices talking about two different trusts and two different jurisdictions of law. But what we're going to take away from this as we move forward, I'm going to reread something Samuel Alito said so we can dive into it a little bit. He said, the government acting as a trustee is unlike a trustee in a private trust created at common law. What exactly did Justice Samuel Alito mean when he said a private trust created at common law? Okay, from this point forward, we are going to focus on privacy, what Samuel Alito mentioned, and the power of the contract. So what did Samuel Alito mean? This case here, Smith versus Morris, says the records of the trust are confidential and their books and records are not subject to review or subpoena. Let me back up and read that again. The records of the trust are confidential and their books and records are not subject to review or subpoena. What's an IRS audit? Is that or is that not a review of your financial documents to determine whether you have some tax liability or not? What is a subpoena? That is where the courts force you to turn over paperwork for the courts to examine. So I'm going to read this one more time. The records of the trust are confidential and their books and records are not subject to review or subpoena. Smith versus Morris. Before we dive in a little bit deeper on the privacy and power of the contract, I want to share with you guys some definitions from the IRS themselves on statutory law versus common law. Okay, we're going to start at the top of this page and read these definitions, and then we're going to read that highlighted portion at the end as a bonus. The IRS makes this distinction between the two kinds of law. Common law comprises the body of principles, the rules of actions relating to government and security of persons and property, which derive their authority solely from usages, customs, or from judgments and decrees of courts, recognizing, affirming, and enforcing such usages and customs. Folks, what they're telling you is the common law has some history to it. There's precedence to it. There's something behind it to make it valid and legitimate. Here's their definition of statutory law. Refers to laws enacted and established by a legislative body. That's the whole definition. So what they're saying is, you and I vote people into office. They get into office. They say, hey, this sounds like a good idea. Let's pass and make it a law. There's no history. As it says in the common law, it says It says relating to government and security of persons or property which derive their authority solely from usages and customs. There's history. And it derives authority, it says, or from judgments and decrees of courts recognizing, affirming, and enforcing such usages and customs. There's a history. The common law is meaty. The statutory law is something they say sounds like a good idea. Let's make it happen. That's the difference between the two. Now, down here at the bottom, it says the tax court is a statutory court of limited jurisdiction and strict compliance with all essential jurisdictional elements is necessary before the court is empowered to enter a legal decision in the case. You can screenshot that, pause it, Google those numbers at the bottom down there, and pull that up and read it for yourself. It's on their website. So what it's saying is the court has a limited jurisdiction. Limited jurisdiction means there's some places you just can't go. I read that to you because we just read Smith versus Morris. And we're going to finish this thing off with the most powerful court case in United States court history, just so you can get an idea of what limited jurisdiction looks like. So here's where the IRS tells you the power of your contract. Title 26 of the code, section 61, reads as such. Gross income means all income from whatever source derived, including but not limited to the following items: income from an interest in an estate or trust. IRS states that fiduciary accounting income is the amount of income determined under the local law or the specific terms of the governing instrument. Now, the governing instrument is your trust contract. The contract governs, not anybody outside. So let's read that again. The IRS states fiduciary accounting income is the amount of income determined under local law or the specific terms of the governing instrument. Does that or does that not put you on par with the law? Right? Local law puts you on par with the local law. But here's the deal. If you pick your jurisdiction properly, you're going to be in a common law jurisdiction. There is no local law because this is a federal organization. As you get a little bit deeper into Title 26, we're going to look at Section 643B. It says income is determined under the terms of the governing instrument. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go look at Section 643B. This is one of those interactive parts of this training, and I need you guys to see that all of this information is at your fingertips, and documentation beats conversation all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. So let's take a look at this next slide, and I want you to pull up this Google screen. Okay, guys, so this is a simple Google search. Here's what you need to put in the search bar. IRC 26, Section 643B, right? And it should come up looking just like this. And the second link, hopefully when you pull it up, will be that link down there that says www.law.cornell.edu. And then you're going to click on that link and just scroll down to where it says Section B. And I'm going to pull up Section B in the next slide for you so that we can read it together. But I want you to have it on your own computer so you can go back and read it again, because it's a little bit of legalese in this, and I want you to go back and process it for yourself after we go through it. Okay, if the Google search went well and you got into Cornell Law and scrolled down to Section B, which is called income, which is what we were talking about, income for the trust, then this is what you should be looking at. So let's read it through, and then I'll break it down in layman's terms so you can see how powerful your contract actually is. It says, for purposes of this subpart and subparts B, C, and D, the term income, when not preceded by the words taxable, distributable net, undistributable net, or gross, means the amount of income of the estate or trust for the taxable year determined under the terms of the governing instrument and applicable local law. Items of gross income constituting extraordinary dividends or taxable stock dividends, which the fiduciary acting in good faith determines to be allocable to corpus under the terms of the governing instrument and applicable local law, shall not be considered income. So let's break this down. There's a lot of legalese. Let's make it simple. The first part, for the purposes of this subpart B, C, and D, the term income when not preceded by taxable, distributable, all of that we're going to leave alone. This says the amount of income under the estate or trust for the taxable year determined under the terms of the governing instrument. Means the amount of income of the estate or trust for the taxable year determined under the terms of the governing instrument and applicable local law. But because we're a common law trust and this is a federal organization, not a statutory organization, there is no local law. So it's telling you that income itself is determined under the governing instrument. Then it goes on to say, in terms of the governing applicable law, and it says items of gross income constituting extraordinary dividends or taxable stock dividends. That means a large amount of income, even if it's taxable stock dividend income. It says which the fiduciary is the trustee, the person in control, which the fiduciary acting in good faith determines to be allocable to corpus under the terms of the governing instrument and applicable local law shall not be considered income. So let's simplify that. It says if you have items of gross income constituting extraordinary dividends, big bucks, or taxable stock dividends, which the trustee acting in good faith determines to be allocable to corpus, that means it's an asset, it's not income. It says under the terms of the governing instrument and applicable local law, then it shall not be considered income. So what they just told you is if you have massive amounts of income come in, the trustee acting in good faith determines it to be a part of the corpus of the trust and not income under the governing instrument, then it shall not be considered income. Point blank, period. Now, I wanted you guys to have that on a Google screen so you can process through it, chew on it a little bit, come back and listen to this portion of the explanation in this training. It is telling you that your contract determines what is income and what is not. And that's from the IRS given to you by Cornell Law School. That's not something Roger wrote. That's not something Roger said. That's just something Roger's sharing with you that's right there at your fingertips. Okay, so now let's transition from the IRS to the federal government and look at the Uniform Trust Code so you can see how powerful your contract is. The Uniform Trust Code is a federal statute handed down by the federal government to the states on how to deal with trust. I want you to hear the first sentence of the Uniform Trust Code. It says the Uniform Trust Code is primarily a default statute. Most of the code's provisions can be overridden in the terms of the trust. Most of the code's provisions can be overridden by your contract. That's how it starts out. Interesting, right? So let's scroll down to the next highlighted section, which reads this. Section 106 and 107 focus on the sources of law that will govern a trust. Section 106 clarifies that despite the code's comprehensive scope, not all aspects of the law of trust have been codified. The Uniform Trust Code is supplemented by the common law of trust and principles of equity. Section 107 addresses the selection of the jurisdictions or jurisdictions whose laws will govern the trust. A settler, absent overriding public policy concerns, is free to select the law that will determine the meaning and effect of trust terms. You can pick your jurisdiction, but I want to focus on this part, that check mark. It says the Uniform Trust Code is supplemented by the common law of trusts and principles of equity. Didn't the IRS tell us that common law trusts no longer exist? Then why is this language inside of a federal statute that still exists today? But I also want to tie this to what Sonia Sotomayor said. She said it's the government's privilege to be informed by the common law. And I told you everything on the federal level is informed by the common law. So this makes sense. The Uniform Trust Code is supplemented by the common law of trust and the principles of equity, because that's how things work at the federal level. Everything is about common law. So you guys get to choose to operate in that jurisdiction of common law, because it tells you you get to determine what law will determine the meaning and effect of a trust terms. Here's one more section of the Uniform Trust Code before we move on to the most cited case in United States court history. It says, however, the Uniform Trust Code does not try to incorporate detailed rules for every conceivable kind of trust, nor does it incorporate all of the kinds of trust there are. It does not contain statutory rules that are already governing trust in many jurisdictions and that are working just fine. It does not displace, for example, the Uniform Prudent Investor Act or the Uniform Custodial Trust Act. What the Uniform Trust Code contains is a set of basic default rules that fairly, consistently, and clearly govern voluntary trust. It is a default statute for the most part because the terms of a trust instrument will govern, even if inconsistent with statutory rule. Now, I'm going to read that again, and I'm going to use trust contract so you guys can get the gist of it. This is a default statute for the most part because the terms of a trust contract will govern even if inconsistent with statutory rule. It will override statute. That's why they call it the governing instrument. It is, as we mentioned in the beginning, something that the Constitution says lawmakers can't pass a law that can impair it, and courts must enforce it. So it is truly the governing instrument. And this next court case, I think, should make that very clear as we get ready to wrap this up. Hale versus Hinkle is the most cited court case in United States court history, and it speaks directly to what we've been talking about in this training. Here's a little backdrop to this case, a little explanation on what it's about. Your right to private contract. Hale versus Hinkle was decided in 1906 by the United States Supreme Court. Since it was the Supreme Court, the case is binding on all courts of the land until another Supreme Court case says it isn't. Has another Supreme Court case ever overturned Hale versus Hinkle? No. As a matter of fact, since 1906, Hale versus Hinkle has been cited by all of the federal and state appellate court systems over 1,600 times. Remember that in nearly every instance when a case is cited, it has an impact on the precedential authority of the cited case. The more times a case is held up as the law, the more it becomes cast in granite. Here's the opinion of the court. The individual may stand upon his constitutional right as a citizen. He is entitled to carry on his private business in his own way. His power to contract is unlimited. He owes no duty to the state or to his neighbors to divulge his business or to open his doors to an investigation, so far as it may tend to incriminate him. He owes no duty to the state, since he receives nothing therefrom beyond the protection of his life and property. His rights are such as existed by the law of the land, common law, long antecedent to the organization of the state, and can only be taken from him by due process of law and in accordance with the Constitution. He owes nothing to the public so long as he does not trespass upon their rights. Okay, so let's touch on a couple things in here as we wrap this up. It says in the second line, he is entitled to carry on his private business in his own way. That's what Samuel Alito was referring to when he was dealing with the Apache Indians. He said this, you're confusing your situation with a private trust created at common law. Hale versus Hinkle is referring to that. Smith versus Morris says the records of the trust are not subject to review or subpoena. There's true privacy. Then it goes on to say he owes no duty to the state or to his neighbors to divulge his business or to open his doors to an investigation. Remember when the IRS said it's a statutory court of limited jurisdiction? They can't treat us like they can a corporation. I'm going to read the last part here. It says, he owes no duty to the state since he receives nothing therefrom beyond the protection of his life and property. Here's the difference between this entity and any other business entity and that public record, the sole proprietors, the LLCs, the S Corps, the C Corps, all of those things, all of those entities, we have to get permission from the state to exist. We exist by contract and is private, and the Constitution protects contracts. The courts must enforce contracts. So they can't treat us like they can treat a corporation. That's why they can't subpoena the records. That's why they can't review the records. And that's why it is private. The privacy and the power of the contract is how we ended this presentation. And this court case speaks specifically to it, and it is the most powerful, most cited court case in United States court history. So here's a visual for you guys of the entire system. The business trust is where you earn and disperse. Family trust is where you manage and you donate. Your non-operating private family foundation is where you give. It's where you build your legacy tax-free. It's all legal and lawful, and it is there to position and protect and pass on your money to the next generation as you see fit without any outside interference. As we're moving through the system, the most critical part of the system is a proper contract. Contracts are critical. Placing that contract in the proper jurisdiction of law makes it bulletproof, but proper contracts are absolutely critical. As we wind this thing down, guys, I want to simplify it for you a little bit. I know we've talked about a lot of court cases, a lot of IRS stuff, and I want to simplify, make it easy. There are two things a complex trust can do that other trusts and corporations and a person cannot do. The first is they can give away 100% of their gross income to a beneficiary, passing on that tax liability to the beneficiary. The second thing is they can give away 100% of their gross income to charity if they choose to. Now let's take a look at that. These next two slides I pulled off the IRS website several years ago, and I haven't been able to find them since, so I'm glad that I saved them so I could share them with you. Let's read this. Taxation of a non-grantor trust. We know a grantor trust is going to be taxed to the creator. So let's read what it says. If the trust is not a sham and is not a grantor trust, the trust income reduced by amounts distributed to beneficiaries is taxable. I told you a complex trust can either pay the taxes or it can pass on tax liability to the beneficiaries. It goes on to say the trust must obtain a taxpayer ID, identification number, and file annual returns reporting its income. The trust must report distribution to beneficiaries on a K-1, and the beneficiary must include the distributed income on the beneficiary's tax return. Just want to touch real quick on that K1. You remember when we were talking about an LLC earlier and how it would pass the profits on a K1 to the owner of the company or to the business trust? That's called pass-through accounting. You're telling you here that you can do the exact same thing with this trust. Pass that liability on through a K1 filing. It's just a 1041 K1, and they don't put that on here. It just says Form K1. Very interesting. But it's telling you guys that the first thing a trust can do is it can either pay the taxes or it can pass all tax liability to a beneficiary. Here's the second thing a trust can do that other entities and people cannot do. May a trust deduct contributions to a charity? A simple trust cannot. I told you guys that simple trusts have to pass all of the income to the beneficiaries and let them pay the taxes on it. So it can't give to charity. It has to give it away. A grantor trust cannot, because that's still owned by the owner, the creator. So there's limitations on how much a person can give to charity. Here's what it says though. A complex trust may, but the deduction must meet the rules similar to those for deductions by individuals, except for the percentage limitations, and be explicitly allowed in the trust instrument. Trusts that claim a charitable deduction generally also file a 1041. There's your 1041. 1041A, U.S. information return for trust accumulation of charitable amounts. In a grantor trust, the deduction would be attributable to the grantor and governed by IRC Section 170, charitable deductions. So let's be real clear. Let's talk. A simple trust can't give away. It just can't do that. A complex trust may, but the deduction must meet the rules similar to those deductions for individuals. But you see that in quotations? It says except for the percentage limitations. There is no percentage limitations. None. That's why they put that in quotes there. They tried to make it sound like it's going to be treated like an individual, but in quotes it says except for percentage limitations. And it says, and it must be explicitly allowed by the trust instrument, which is true. Okay, so trusts that claim a charitable deduction file a 1041 return for accumulation of charitable trust amounts. It says in a grantor trust, the deduction would be attributable to the grantor because you still own it. It's an alter ego. It's still you. And they have limitations. So a person can give 60% of their gross income to a regular charity, a regular nonprofit. They only allow an individual or person to give 30% to a private family foundation because they know we operate differently. But those are the restrictions that are placed on individuals. They put a cap on how much you can give away. You can't give it all away and literally write it all off. That's why it says except for the percentage limitations. A trust, complex trust, doesn't have any percentage limitations. If you want to give away 100% of your gross income, as a trust, you can give all of it to the foundation. So those are the two things a trust can do. To simplify all of what you heard today, it can pass through 100% of its income to a beneficiary, or it can pass through 100% of its income to a charity. And we're just simply using the rules laid down by the IRS and the courts to operate in the freedoms that we truly have in our right to private contract.